Good morning to you. Mark Stott of HurricaneTrack.com here with your hurricane outlook and discussion for October 10th, 2019. 1 year ago today, Hurricane Michael made landfall as a Category 5 hurricane, the only Category 5 hurricane known to have made landfall along the Florida Panhandle, and only the fourth in United States recorded history. I was here for it, as you well know by now. My team and I worked very hard to set up equipment and document this historic event in ways that are still today unprecedented in the stuff that we learned and the data that we captured, both visual data using our unmanned camera systems to the stories that we were able to capture, especially going back to retrieve those camera systems from Mexico Beach and those few hours that night, a year ago tonight. What an amazing story. And I'll talk about this more at the end. So let's get rid of my picture for a moment and take a look at what's happening in the tropics. Luckily, not much overall. We do have a typhoon, very powerful typhoon in the western Pacific over here, and that's going to make its way towards Japan in the next few days. But the Atlantic Basin is surprisingly quiet. We can just put a big old X here. Nothing going on in the Atlantic Basin, nothing in the eastern Pacific to worry about. And I am surprised. The favorable Madden-Julian oscillation I thought would give us more activity in this region in the month of October. And we're only 10 days in, but the global models really not showing much as we go out into time. And no complaints from people that live along the coast and elsewhere, of course. It is a little bit vexing, though, that, okay, water temperatures are warm. It's still generally the peak of the season. We have a favorable Madden-Julian oscillation, so forth and so on. Sometimes you just don't get development. And it's curious and worthy to note that even with the typhoon that we have over here, and it's going to make headlines as it impacts a huge population area of near and around Tokyo, etc., but this is only the 9th typhoon in the season out there of the year. Normally they have about 12 by now, and elsewhere across the globe, tropical cyclone activity is running below normal for the most part. It certainly isn't above normal. The Atlantic Basin, we're right about where we would be on an average year for the most part. ACE-wise, we're a little bit higher accumulated cyclone energy. And bottom line is it's been not a super busy year all around the tropics here, anywhere in the globe. This has all just been kind of ho-hum in terms of overall activity. But what we have had some impacts. Obviously, Dorian and the legacy that will leave for generations. I'm here in Panama City and going to be in Mexico Beach later talking about Michael. But think about Dorian in a year from now, what people down there are going to be dealing with. And, it just goes to show you that you don't have to have hyperactive years to have these major impacts. And what we have had in the Atlantic Basin, we had Barry here early on in July, and then we had Dorian, which impacted a lot of the coast here, and then of course the direct landfall along the North Carolina Outer Banks, and then Imelda, a very short-lived but highly impactful tropical storm for the Houston and Winnie and Beaumont areas of Texas and elsewhere there. Every season is different, and we still have had big impacts, even though we haven't had a major hurricane landfall in the United States. We certainly came close enough with Dorian. All right, so let's take a look at the broader picture here. Actually, we're going to zoom in. Sorry, lost my train of thought. That's okay. I do want to continue to focus on what's happening here with the typhoon. And again, I've just given up on trying to pronounce the name, so we will just refer to it as the typhoon. And still far enough away that it's not impacting James Reynolds yet, so we'll wait again till tomorrow. I checked his Twitter earlier today, and he was talking about, I think, how it's going to impact the rugby tournament or something that was going on there. A pretty big deal. Let me just look it up on my phone real quick. And here, I'll bring me back up. I record these live, and you never know what's going to happen I noticed he was mentioning something about it, so let's just search James Reynolds real quick and see what he was saying. James Reynolds, there he is. Earth Uncut TV says, so let's see. Super typhoon, however you say it, reaching out to hold the sloth-like claws of that storm system over Far Eastern Russia. The Earth's atmosphere is vast, etc. Yeah, really interesting satellite picture he was talking about there. I don't know if you can see that. Earlier, what was he saying? Typhoon will be clear of Yokohama by the time the match. Right, so there's a, I think it's a rugby tournament down there, and so he's saying it'll be clear of Yokohama by the time the match is scheduled. The main issue will be the cleanup, infrastructure issues, etc. They play the game behind closed doors as a last resort if they have to, assuming the stadium is fine. But, lingering transport issues there. So there's it's the rugby, big rugby deal going on in Japan. So we'll check in with James Reynolds tomorrow, and I'm going to send him a message this afternoon and see how things are going there. So anyway, focusing on what's happening in the Western Pacific here. And as you can see, the typhoon's track is into eastern Japan here, and Tokyo is a big city. Something like 20 million plus people, if I'm not mistaken. And so this will be a significant event, even if it's weakening coming in. That's a lot of people to have to deal with this. So we'll see what happens over the next day or two. Get rid of me again. All right, so that's what's happening in the Westpac. Nothing else brewing anytime soon, which is, again, kind of unusual that things have been pretty quiet, generally speaking, in the Western Pacific. So in the Atlantic Basin, we only have these couple of areas of interest now. 0% with this one, leftovers I think of 92L maybe, and then our storm system, our coastal storm, whatever you want to call it, off the coast of the United States that I've been talking about for several days, and this is generating some overwash I've seen along the Outer Banks of North Carolina, and it'll continue to send waves and rough surf to the rest of the mid-Atlantic parts of the Northeast, gusty winds, etc., occasional rain showers. And if we look at it on the satellite imagery here, it doesn't look like much. There's the storm right in there. And I mean, look at the upper level winds cutting across that. Water temperatures up there are too cold anyway, but it doesn't matter. Even if the water temperatures here, they're fairly warm. Don't get me wrong, they're not like 50 degrees or anything, but those upper level winds are really screaming out of the south and west. And any convection that tries to develop can just forget about it. But this is a very large storm system. We talk about the fetch of wind, that it comes across the ocean there for hundreds of miles, if not more, piling up against the coastline. And so that's going to continue to be an issue for the next day or two along the mid-Atlantic parts of the Northeast, southeastern New England, and elsewhere. So just keep that in mind. Meanwhile, down in the Caribbean, we do have a flare-up of convection. No mention yet from the National Hurricane Center about anything, but interesting to see that, there is some convection there. So the GFS, with its day after day after day insistence that something's going to develop down there, well, it's got part of it right. We do see somewhat of a disturbance down there. And if we look at the vorticity signature here back over at the University of Wisconsin site, go click on this, and we look at the 850 millibar vorticity. It's about 5,000 feet in the atmosphere. First, there's your storm system and the energy associated with it off the East Coast, and the trailing front around it. It's not tropical in nature, but not much going on in the Caribbean underneath those clouds. Not much energy to bundle up. Okay, it's not really there. There's some over northern South America there, and this still might try to coalesce and maybe form something as it gets close to Honduras and Nicaragua here, and then die out as a big rainmaker over Central America. But something in the GFS, I was reading about it over the last several days, that it's got this bias, this tendency to take these lobes of energy here, these little pockets of vorticity, and sort of sling them and rotate them into this monsoonal flow, this westerly wind that comes in this way, and they have the easterly wind coming this way, and it pulls this energy off of Colombia, and it just runs rampant with it. It's like a feedback mechanism. Incorrect physics in the model is what I'm understanding. And so you get this idea that the model believes, it sounds like it's a person or something, but that it takes that energy and can coalesces it really quickly and develops a tropical cyclone out of it. The problem with that, even though that it can be incorrect, is sort of this phantom bias storm that it creates, often, apparently. Sometimes it's real, right? I mean, Michael, a year ago, had its genesis down in this same area, from a larger cyclonic gyre, the Central American gyre, Gyre, gyre. It's just a fancy term for a big, broad area of turning in the atmosphere, larger than a tropical wave, but smaller than the Madden-Julian oscillation phenomenon or a convectively coupled Kelvin wave. And I know I'm throwing a lot of terms at you, but folks, these are just different ways that you can get tropical cyclones to develop. And once in a while, these little pieces of energy here will pinwheel in off of South America and get caught up into this overall cyclonic flow, and something tries to develop. We'll see. It's not out of the realm of possibility, but the other global models are just not really enthusiastic about it. Elsewhere, look at this energy out over the Great Plains of the U.S., the lower 48 there. We're transitioning here. I mean, it's still fall, very much so, autumn in the Northern Hemisphere, but I do track and go into the field for winter storms. And it's not going to be long before I start doing that for this year, especially with the support that we are getting through Patreon. That I am, and I'll talk about this at a later time, but I'm just telling you, it's not over when hurricane season is over or we start seeing hurricane season wind down. Not by a long shot. Let me just switch to the white color here. Any coastal storms, this current storm notwithstanding, because I'm down here in the Panhandle, obviously for the 1-year anniversary of Michael, but you bet any of these nor'easters that we might get in the wintertime, I am interested in these high plains blizzards and even the ones that affect places like Dallas, Oklahoma City, those ice storms. I now have the ability to be able to cover these events because of people like you that are supporting what I do via Patreon. And I had dinner last night with a colleague, a friend of mine, Doug Kiesling. You know him from stormchasingvideo.com. He's been around doing this for a long time, and I've known him a long time, over 20 years, but I've never met him. Can you believe that? Until last night. That's true. It's absolutely true. I've been feet away from him in storms and other things, but I've never met the guy. And just as a side note here, I met him last night for dinner. He's down here for Michael as well. He was in the eye of Michael out there on Highway 98 between Tyndall Air Force Base and Mexico Beach, and has that incredible shot. If you haven't seen it, look up Doug Kiesling, K-I-E, right? S-L-I-N-G, and Hurricane Michael I. Unbelievable. Anyhow, he and I were talking about winter storms and covering them and so forth, and it's definitely something that I'm going to be doing. And as we go forward, we think that it's going to be a busy season winter-wise. So even as the tropics calm down, I'm going to be on other weather things, so look forward to that. I don't know where all that came from, but there you go. So back to the topic at hand. No, there's not much to worry about in the tropics. That is good news, but just remember, we do transition out of the summer season and tropical weather into more of the impactful storm systems for the lower 48 over here, and then eventually we start looking ahead to factors that will shape next year's hurricane season, but that's pretty far out in time. Also watching, you can see clearly some low pressure out here, tropical wave, very vigorous, but too much dry air, clearly some wind shear cutting across it. But nevertheless, they are trying. The hurricane season is trying, but it's running up against climatology now, working against it, and other obstacles that just aren't going to allow much to develop. I still think we'll see a couple of more named storms before the end of the season. maybe that's confirmation bias that we'll see. As long as they don't impact people, I guess they can form out in the ocean. Ships can avoid them and whatever. Look at this. Speaking of lower 48 weather, this is what I was talking about. I wish I could be in 4 places at once. I'd be down here. Switch back over to a little red color. I'd be here today, which I am. So it's not like I would be. Here I am. I'd love to be all over here, but I can't. And I'd love to be here somewhere. This sort of pink color or whatever that is, those are winter storm warnings. And I'd love to be in Tokyo for that typhoon. Just can't do it. We don't have the technology yet to split you into 4 equal parts with the same consciousness. That's a sci-fi movie in the making, isn't it? Maybe that's the next. Screw the Sharknado. Let's bankroll and Kickstarter a sci-fi movie where a storm chaser is able to clone themselves and be in 4 places at once to appreciate the weather in different parts of the globe. Probably need about $1.5 million, and we can do that. All right? So let me know. Send me a check. Hey, stranger things have happened, right? Speaking of interesting shows, anyhow, you can tell that I am just, I'm in a different mode today. When you have something like this, looking back at Michael, and you go through a Cat 5 hurricane, it changes you. And truly, this was amazing. 1 year ago, right about now, is a little bit later than now. By the time you see this video, it'll be pretty much right on time. 1 p.m. Central Daylight Time, and so that would be 2 o'clock Eastern. Michael had made landfall, and we now know that it was a Cat 5 based on the reanalysis that they have done since then. But operationally, it was at 1:55. I was at the Hampton Inn in Panama City, and if you haven't seen that, I'm going to take just a minute and show you a little bit about what that looked like here. I've got my Michael folder, hopefully handy. This is what the footage looked like from the Hampton Inn. Let's turn the volume down. I put the GoPro in the windowsill and then just stayed away from it because it was just like, dangerous. And there's pieces of buildings blowing by, and the wind is just ripping through there, tearing stuff up. And, we stayed in the building and stayed safe. The hotel got ripped apart in many spots. And this Hampton Inn is still closed, unfortunately. The manager there was fantastic. He did a great job. He was very responsible, very helpful. It's a shame that all those people are unemployed now, presumably. I don't know if they went on to work elsewhere at another property. That was from the Hampton Inn. Then, of course, our incredible footage here from the GoPro that augments the live feed. We have live cameras that we set up to show people what happens live, but we back them up using GoPro cameras that are inside of a special case, the Pelican case. Actually, they're called Storm cases. That's the brand name. They're made by Pelican. And we have a big battery that runs these things for several days if necessary, and a couple of other modifications that we did, to make them last that long in full motion video, not just taking a picture every 5 seconds or something. It's real 720, 30 frames per second video. And we can now do 1080 and get about 28 hours doing that. And eventually, as these chips get better and better, we'll be able to record in 2.7K and eventually maybe even 4K. And we can put a 2 terabyte chip in there someday. Oh, wouldn't that be amazing? But this is what we captured, as the morning progressed. Things got worse. There's toucans, stuff falling off of buildings from behind my camera. The wind started really ramping up. The roof comes off of toucans right about here. Let's back it up. Where was it? Right there. The roof comes off of toucans. And we saw this live through the live feed, and then knew, man, we have got to get back to Mexico Beach as soon as possible and make sure we get that GoPro if it survived. We saw what you're seeing right now live from the Nest Cam. There goes the roof. And it was a moment. That's when we knew, this is early. This is before the surge. and the surge eventually comes in, the eye wall. Still no surge yet. This is getting close to 11:45, 11:50 Central Time that day, and then just a few minutes later, the surge comes in. Unbelievable conditions. You see this building over here. Watch it. It goes across. Look at that. Just unreal. See that building go across the street there. The Exxon sign remained intact. I don't know how. You just explain that to me. You're looking at darn near Cat 5 wind. Nobody was able to measure it with any degree of accuracy down there. There were a few attempts made, but I don't have a sensor at this point here. It wouldn't have survived anyway. It doesn't matter. But we do have the visual. We have the visual evidence of what happened. It all calms down eventually, and that was the aftermath. And we know that things have been rough, difficult for people. They're dealing with insurance, and that's a nightmare. And my heart goes out to people. They have to go through the preparation, the anxiety for that, survive the hurricane itself. Hopefully they evacuate it, but some people don't. And that's just the reality of it. We try to get people to hopefully leave, and then they have to survive. They survived all that. Then they got to survive the aftermath. And it's very taxing. And that is what I try to keep studying and being a part of after all that drama that I just showed you is over. That's the eye candy, so to speak. That's what people say, ooh and ah. It makes for interesting television. It makes for an interesting documentary or whatever. True. But when it's over, it's not over for the people who still have to deal with picking up the pieces of their lives. They may have to bury loved ones. And this is not easy to hear, I'm sure, but it's the facts. And if you have been through it, you know what I'm talking about. And as a geographer and a scientist that studies impacts of hurricanes especially, I also like to study other weather, that's for sure, but hurricanes are my specialty. I know more than most people because I've done this for 2 decades. It continues on, and that's why I'm here, is to be a part of this. And 5 years from now, 10 years from now, I will still be looking back at a sense of awe and being humbled by what not only nature did and the power of hurricanes did in this area, this hurricane did in this area, but also at the success of our project, that we were able to capture something using a safe method like nobody has ever been able to capture before, and that included the wind data and the pressure data that we captured from the Hathaway Bridge between Panama City Beach. And now, because of our crowdfunding and Patreon, you see that right down there, we are able to do even more. We are more well equipped a year later than I have ever been in my entire career, and that's almost entirely due to our crowdfunding. Literally people reaching out and contributing funding or equipment or both to our cause. And that is why we were able to do what we are able to do. That's why we were able to do what we did last year and bring you those extraordinary images that are going to help people, have helped people, will continue to help people in the future on a lot of different levels. So from right here in my heart, I thank you all for your support over these past 20 plus years that HurricaneTrack.com has been around, and the age of social media, what we have done together. That Michael experience is because people have supported what I have done, both financially, with their encouragement, their insistence that I persevere through some of the tough times that I have had. Remember, this is my job, and without crowdfunding and without people helping out and sponsorships over the years, whatever the funding has been, I can't do this. And yet, here I am, 20 plus years later, and we're still going strong, and it's because of you guys now more than ever. So I appreciate that more than you will ever know, and the evidence of it is seen in that video that we are able to do these extraordinary things. All right, so there you go. Sometimes I like to speak from the heart, and that's one of them. Hey, real quick, speaking of Patreon, in December, I'm going to start a podcast exclusively on Patreon. Doesn't matter what level you become a patron. $1, $10, $100. It doesn't matter. The podcast will be available to you, and it's going to be called Stories from the Hurricane Highway, an original podcast from yours truly, where I'm going to literally talk about my career. And we're going to start at the very beginning, way back 20 plus years ago, going back further than that in time. Actually, how did you get into this? All that stuff. And it'll take years to get through all this, and I'm excited about it. So from December through May, once a week, I'll drop a new episode. Stories from the Hurricane Highway, exclusively on Patreon. Not going to be available anywhere else. So if hey, I'm thinking about that Patreon thing, there you go. That's a good incentive. And even just $1 a month. Imagine if just a third of my YouTube subscribers, or a third of my Twitter followers, or a third of my Facebook likes, or whatever you call them, fans, were to become patrons at just $1 a month, what I could do. Look at what we have done. Think of it that way, and think about what we can do going forward. And if you want to be a part of it, that would be super awesome. And you get to be a part of the podcast. You hear about it, and you get to hear it. All right. Have a great rest of your, what's today? Thursday? Yes, it is. And I tell you, man, it's just, my days are running together. A lot of thoughts down here. I'm looking forward to going and meeting some people this afternoon and evening in Mexico Beach. I've gotten to know some people down here that are very close to me now, and I'm going to see them again this evening. We're going to be over at the Rustic Sands campground. They got a grill there and a tiki bar. Steve, the owner, is going to let us show the documentary, the Untitled Chapter, around 7:30, 8 o'clock tonight. If you're in the area, come on down. I'll be there. Doug Kiesling will be there. Other folks. Say hello. Give each other a big hug. You've been through it. It's a year. You've made it this far. Hang in there. All right? We're with you. We're all back in your program down here, as my dad says. Have a great rest of your Thursday. I am Mark Sudduth for HurricaneTrack.com. Thanks again so much for being there on your side of the screen, listening and watching me for all this time. I appreciate it. I'll be back with more for you tomorrow.